What's up YouTube, it's Caleb with Sealand Visuals, and today I'm going to be talking about why I went with the 70-200 f4 rather than the f2.8 version. So yeah, let's just go ahead and get right into the video. So I recently picked up this 70-200 lens. This is the f4 version like I mentioned. I chose this version over the f2.8 and there were a few factors that made that decision for me. First of all, it's going to be the price. Obviously, these are both Pro Series, L Series lenses with Canon, so that means they are going to come at a higher price, weather sealed, better build quality, all of that jazz. But the price difference between this lens and the more expensive 2.8 version was too much for me to justify getting the 2.8 version. It's over $1,000 difference, and you know that really kind of made the difference in why I went with this f4 version. I don't think you're getting significantly better quality or $1,000+ of quality by going with that 2.8 version. So that was kind of one of the main factors that made me go with this version. Another thing that I like about this version is it is smaller and lighter than the 2.8 version. It's definitely smaller in the thickness of it, but it's also smaller in the length. And I just really preferred that. This lens can actually fit kind of flush in your camera bag, so you can set it flat down and close your camera bag on top. At least the camera bag that I have the Peter McKinnon Nomadic collab bag, the 20 liter I believe. And you can set this lens flat down and it sits in there no problem. You can zip up the bag just fine, throw in a laptop in the back case, and yeah, there's really no issues. I mean, it has all the standard buttons too. So, you know, you're not really losing out on anything. And if anything, I think you're gaining flexibility with how small this lens is, how light it is. And then obviously the price, like I mentioned, it's cheaper. So I don't think you're missing out on anything. I think you're actually kind of gaining a few options by going with this lens. You know, it's a lot more portable, and that means you're gonna tag it more, you're gonna shoot with it more because it's a lot more comfortable to use. You know, if you're going on a travel trip, you're a lot more likely, I feel like, to put this lens in your bag rather than if you were to have the 2.8 version. You could maybe make up some reasons why you don't need that lens. This lens, like I mentioned, has all the button features. It has the lock button, which I really like, and it has basically just kind of all your standard autofocus to manual focus, your stabilizer modes, and stabilizer on off. Other than that, you're not really losing anything. You get the control ring, you get the manual focus ring, and obviously the zoom ring. Both the version 2.8 and the f4 version, they both extend out, which is highly annoying, especially for a telephoto lens. It is really annoying that it zooms out, considering the fact that the EF versions never really zoomed out. Sony's versions don't zoom out, so that is kind of a hindrance with this lens. But I think that the versions coming up, I think they're gonna probably come out with new versions once they release the R1 and the R5 Mark II. I think they're gonna try and go more for the pro route and, you know, get rid of the extending barrel, because that is kind of a feature that most pro lenses don't have. They don't extend out, and you know, I think with the R1 being kind of their flagship pro camera for sports and whatnot, especially with the upcoming Olympics, I think that they're gonna really try and hit that market where this lens doesn't zoom out anymore. I think that this lens does not have that the 2.8 has is the tripod collar, but with this lens, I'm not really missing it because it's a super light lens. With the Sony versions that I used in the past, they were extremely heavy, especially the Mark I of the 2.8. It was extremely heavy. It was a brick, and you really did need that tripod collar so you could, you know, mount it on a monopod or just have like another point of grip on the lens. So you could steady it a lot more. But with this lens, it's so light, you don't need that, at least in my opinion. You don't really need a monopod, and with it, if you are using a tripod, you can balance your camera on it just fine because it's not as front heavy. Other than that, another pro for this lens is the orientation of the zoom ring to manual focus ring. You see right here, the zoom ring is down at the bottom, and then you have your manual focus ring right here, and then you have the control ring at the edge. On the 2.8 version, it is completely flipped around. So you have your control ring at the base of the lens, then you have your manual focus ring closer to the base of the lens, then you have your zoom ring all the way out on the edge of the lens. And I have seen a lot of people complain about that because you're having to reach all the way out here, and then when you zoom all the way out, you're still like out here having to hold the lens rather than being back closer to the body. And I really like that this lens has the zoom ring closer to the body. And then I also like having the control ring at the end. I'm more likely to use it than if it's at the base of the camera. I've heard a lot of people say that too. So I think that could be something to consider. If you pull manual focus a lot, I really like this manual focus ring. And I wouldn't want it closer to the body, and I wouldn't want the zoom all the way out here. That would just be really annoying in my opinion, especially because the barrel extends. If it didn't extend, I would be maybe fine with having it out here, but since it does extend, I kind of like having it closer to the body. That's just my personal preference. I know some people might disagree with that. Talk about the lens hood. The lens hood for this one and the 2.8 are pretty much exactly the same. They're flush, which I really like. I know the old EF ones, they had like the ridges on them. The Sony Mark I version that I used to use, that also had ridges on it, and I really hated that because you can't set your lens down flat unless you take off the lens hood. And so like whenever I'm shooting basketball a lot, and I just kind of want to take a break and set my camera down, I can just set it down with the lens hood flush on the ground. I don't have to worry about taking the lens hood off or just setting my camera flat on the ground. It just makes it easier to just pick back up and shoot once play resumes. Huge feature that I like. A lot of people don't really think about lens hoods when they're buying cameras or camera lenses. That's one feature that I really liked about this lens. And it was kind of one of the reasons I did end up going with this version rather than the older EF versions. And I'll kind of get into that now. So another lens I could have bought would have been the EF 2.8. Either the Mark I or the Mark II. The Mark I and the Mark II, or the Mark I would have been probably significantly cheaper. I found a few that were under $1,000. For the Mark II EF 2.8 version, they were around $1,200 for like a good condition one. But then you have to buy the adapter, the RF to EF or EF to RF, whatever it's called. But the adapter so you can use an RF mount camera on EF glass. And I thought about going that route, but the mount adapter is about $150, and then you're paying $1,200, $1,300 for the lens. The price wise, it's gonna come pretty close to this, if not exactly the same to this. And then kind of my next consideration was, when am I gonna be getting rid of this lens? I don't foresee me holding on to this lens forever. When they do come out with that 2.8 version that zooms internally, I think I'm gonna switch to that. Maybe once they come out with that lens, and then after maybe a year there's some more on the used market, might buy a used version, but I definitely think that's where I wanna go. And so I was considering what lens would have more value if I go to sell it. And I really think this lens is gonna have more value in say 1.5 to 2 years, rather than an EF version that's already been on the market for however many years. Either the version 1 or the version 2, those lenses are extremely old, and so if you do go to resell them, they're not going to have as much value as this lens. So even though I'm paying necessarily more upfront for this lens, I get better functionality because I'm not using a mount adapter. Even though I've heard that there aren't really any issues with a mount adapter, just anytime you are introducing any type of glass in between your camera and your lens, that is gonna it gives the chance for there to be issues. That's just not really a chance I want to take, especially if you're doing paid stuff. I don't want to miss a shot or whatever because focus isn't working or whatnot, and you're getting the best focus if you're using the RF lenses. So that was kind of that point. And then like I said, the value based, I'm willing to pay more upfront now, and I'll be able to get more of my money back later whenever I do go to sell it, rather than trying to sell one of those EF lenses in a couple years. Other than that, I really think that's really my only considerations for this lens and why I think you should get it. I really do think that the f4 version is going to be better than the 2.8 version, especially if you're shooting more video. And that's kind of my last point of this video, is I do shoot more video than I do photo. Especially I shoot a lot of football video, a lot of video outside. And if you're shooting outside in daylight, you're gonna have to worry about an ND filter, which is what this is. If you're not shooting at night or in extremely low lit places, you don't need the 2.8. And even whenever I do shoot at night, I just take the ND filter off. No issues. I'm able to get perfect exposure in camera. No external ND filters, no nothing. I don't have to worry about stopping down. I can shoot at f4. If I'm shooting a sport, you know, I'll do 1/25th shutter and shooting at 60 FPS. And I don't really have any issues with any noise or anything. I do obviously prefer shooting in daylight with this f4 because then I can introduce the ND filter, stop down, you know, 2 stops and get kind of the perfect exposure, maybe even 1 stop overexposed, which is kind of where I like to be at, especially with Canon. With Sony, you do need to be a few more stops overexposed, but with C-Log 3, shooting at either 0 or 1 stop of overexposure with an f4 lens, you're gonna get perfect exposure, especially when you're outside, like I mentioned. On the photo end, I don't really have any low light issues with this lens. It's not ideal for low light. Obviously you want the 2.8 aperture, especially if you're gonna be shooting higher shutter speeds, like 1000/1 or however you say shutter speed. But you know, if you're shooting at 1/1000 or whatever, you know, you're trying to freeze that action, you are probably gonna have to push the ISO on the f4 lens. But you know, with AI denoise in Lightroom and these more modern cameras like the R5, R6, or any Sony cameras for that matter, you know, the newer cameras do have better capability to deal with noise. So I do think that would be another consideration, is if you're shooting on a newer camera, don't fear going with the f4, and especially if you're looking to maybe invest in a kit. If you're buying a higher end camera, you can spend more money on your camera rather than the lenses, and you're gonna get more features within the camera. So like I went with the R5, I may have spent more money on the R5, but now I can kind of cut back on my lens spend and, you know, go with an f4 because it can handle low light a lot better than, say, if I were to go with an older camera. But yeah, that's pretty much it for this video. If you got any value out of this, make sure you leave a like or a subscribe if you're feeling generous. I really appreciate that. I'm looking to add more value with this channel. So if you're interested in seeing any of the more videos I'm gonna be coming out with, make sure to subscribe, and I hope to see you in the next one. Peace.